Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. My name is Lori Oldham, and we're here today to celebrate Constitution Week. And what is Constitution Week, you ask? Well, we have the professionals here to talk all about it, and in particular, our expert professors, Dr. Nick Boucher and Dr. Masa Ome. And so I'm going to hand it over to you all so you can go ahead and kick it up. Thank you.
All right, so what is Constitution Week? It is a congressionally mandated holiday, a whole week's worth of events. Public institutions are encouraged, if not required, to have some acknowledgement of this holiday. We usually do a 28th Amendment contest when we are actually physically on campus. We did a good run of 3 years of that contest, but now we are more limited since we are doing everything digitally in this new world here. So we thought we would come together and talk about 2 main issues, both related to constitutions at different levels, keeping in mind that each state has their own constitution. And we just witnessed one of the artifacts of California's unique constitution, that being of the direct democratic effort of a recall election. So we're going to talk about the recall election. We'll also get on some national politics by way of discussing the January 6, 2021 attack on our nation's capital. So a lot of different questions you might have. Feel free to bring those up here. But we're going to try to keep it conversational and discursive. I think we might be cherry picking some questions from the YouTube chat and from within this Zoom. Other than that, we'll see how it goes. Masa, how you doing?
Pretty good. Thanks for having us, Lori. This is awesome. We're on this remote operation mode, but we're compelled that we have to do something. And there are a couple things that Nick mentioned that were related to constitution or political systems in general, one at the federal level, one at the state level. So yeah, we would like to make this one not like typical lecture type. So encourage all the viewers and participants here to don't be shy and ask us some questions. We might not have complete answers, but we have what we have to offer. So, yeah.
Great. So where do we want to start? Initially, we talked about discussing what was most recent on our minds, the California recall. Did we want to start there?
Yeah, I think that might be a.
Okay. Well, I have some of the results, freshest I could find. Let me know if you have fresher data. But the New York Times was 74% reporting the results of the recall election. In California, it was 64% no to 36% yes, roughly rounding up there. So 5.9 million saying no to recall California Governor Gavin Newsom versus 3.3 million. You can go to the LA Times to really narrow in on this data, take a more fine-tooth comb to it, and you can actually see your precinct. So you can see how your neighbors voted alongside yourself. I already did this for my neighborhood. You can see it. Some precincts are just one person that voted, and some of the more rural areas. You can see a map of San Diego to see the breakdown, and you can also see it by county. San Diego, the vote broke a little different, but still decisive. 59% saying no on the recall, 41% saying yes. If you break down by that data further, you'll see, not surprisingly, local politics and the various trends. So Coronado voted yes on the recall, actually, at 54% saying yes. And Larry Elder was the victor in terms of who they preferred, their first preference out the gate for Coronado voters. Let's see here. Former San Diego Mayor Kevin Faulconer got 400,000 votes, falling well behind Larry Elder. That's about 9% of the vote total that we've seen thus far. So a little bit on the context and the data there. What do you got to say about that?
May I say something about recall though, for those students who have yet to take our American politics class? Not all states have recall election processes. I believe 19 or 20, I want to say 20 states, about 20 states do have recall, and whether they could have it or not all depends on state constitution and state legislative processes. Some states though require some kind of wrongdoing, similar to that of impeachment, right? At the federal level, a president can be removed if there's a substantial case of some wrongdoing. This is high crime in Constitution. That's not the case with California. California, you could just recall somebody by based on I don't like him or I don't like his politics or her politics. Also, California has the lowest requirement in terms of signature, I believe, that the proportion of last gubernatorial election voters is what you have to get. And I cannot recall the actual percentage there.
12%.
12%. I was going to say 5% is for propositions, and others, I think they have different threshold. And also this time around, given the COVID remote situation, court actually gave extension on the signature gathering period. So if any, could be one of the easiest recall election that happened in terms of one's ability to collect signature. I think they received 4-month extension to make that happen. So that's a little bit of context. And as Nick mentioned, it is a remnant, leftover of this idea of direct democracy as opposed to representative democracy, where your vote actually count directly to an action of a government. So California has that system.
Yeah.
If I may, before we went on, Masa, you mentioned something about the cost of the recall election. Can you talk a little bit just about that?
So I'm kind of, it's about, so if we're just talking about costs, hundreds of millions were spent on this election, and next scheduled election was to happen in less than 2 years. So some are saying, why can't we wait till then if we really wanted to remove this person? The money could have spent, for example, on supporting community colleges system. But some may have an opinion that, no matter how it costs, it is important to, uphold the institutions, the processes that are guaranteed in our state constitution here. So, even if you're not supportive of the idea of recalling Governor Newsom, you might be supportive of the idea of upholding our constitution. So you could have a different opinion and a different rationale as to why one might have supported the process, though may have voted no, I'm not going to recall him. So it's more dynamic in a sense. So there are a lot of moving parts to this in terms of how voters are deciding what they want to do. I think that might be something to it's something noteworthy, I guess. Any thoughts, Nick, on this?
Yeah, you can get into the philosophical merits, and you could talk about thresholds, the system, yes, being in California having a lower threshold. I'm trying to think too about if there could be some type of, if we think that it's too low, how you could go about reforming it in a way that's not just increasing the percent of signatures needed, right? increasing it.
Yeah, so it's Travis asked here on chat, 12% of, not the population, the 12% of those who have voted in the last governor's election.
Yeah, so that equated to 1.5 valid petition signatures, about right? 1,495,000 or whatever.
Yeah.
That was. So, and the signatures have to be from at least 5 counties, and it must be, each of those counties has to equal at least 1% of the total votes cast. That's from Article 2 of the California Constitution there. So whether or not it's worth it, yeah, I guess it depends on your own politics, right? So there's a lot of individuals that will say it was worth it because they don't like the sitting governor. You might be able to get into hypothetical. If we're giving each side kind of a generous reading on that, even though it might have failed to get the result, getting the governor out, if we're talking about, again, the proponents of the recall, they might say, well, it maybe sent a signal to that governor to do a better job or to scare them a little bit, right? Because there's critiques even from people on the left, but they were saying, listen, I'd rather have him in office and then try to primary against him, right? Soon enough, right? But what's soon enough? That's a big personal question that we each will probably have different answers on there.
And related to that, Nick, I wanted to get into the second step of recall. How it's set now is that if the recall was to happen, meaning that yes side won, and the voters are able to choose a candidate from the list of, so many, or you can write in a candidate. And typically, usually in regular election cycle, there's a primary election, and in California, relatively recently, we have adopted the system, the top 2 system, where the runoff happens between top 2 vote getter during the primary election, and those 2 would then compete in general election. So you could have 2 Democrats in Democrat heavy district or 2 Republicans, regardless of their party affiliation, top 2 vote getters would get it. In terms of recall election, because it's not a regular election cycle and processes, we don't have that, right? So if we have a 2 candidate, whoever gets most votes would get the majority vote, right? Because there are only 2 candidates. In terms of gubernatorial recall election, the second question of who should be the replacement, it's simple plurality, meaning no matter how small it is, the person with the largest vote wins. So you can imagine 10 candidates, they are somewhat equally qualified and popular. You could have somebody elected by 11% of voter. So, and if you count the turnout, right, how low turnout typically are, you can kind of see the effect of this mathematically. Smaller voter pool to begin with, and only 11% or 10% or 9% or even less voter support could have elected governor replacement. That in itself is a kind of a sticky situation, I think, in terms of democratic theory or the idea of democracy in general, right, Nick?
Yeah, sometimes that's referred to as balkanization or fragmentation.
Yep.
You see that more commonly in France, where you'll have more options, and that's the trade-off, right? People often bemoan our 2-party, 2-choice system, especially as you get to higher levels of office. But that's to encourage large, hopefully, if not majorities, large pluralities, right? Having a victor get 40+% of the vote. But there's conversation within the discipline too, especially in terms of thinking about political theory and political philosophy. On why would say someone selected with 40% be more valid than someone who got 18%, right? Or why is 50+1 in majority type institutions like many of ours, why do we equate that with democracy, right? You can make, and there's people arguing on each side, but including folks saying some of those standards are arbitrary. Others saying they're not arbitrary because these laws are going to affect a lot, all of us. So we want the most amount of people, right, backing them.
I think
so
system seems to be kind of designed to enhance more voices to be reflected as opposed to do the opposite. So encouraging, why do we adopt the top two primary system? Well, we wanted to make sure that winner would have larger proportion. But I think there's a definite philosophical conversation there. But some of my friends are really scared because we weren't sure who is going to be if recall was to be successful. It could have been anybody. So any questions or thoughts from students here or on YouTube?
I was going to state some kind of history there, some interesting history. So as Masa noted, not all states have even the ability to do a recall. And California is only one of 2 states that have ever successfully recalled a governor. Of course, that was in 2003 with Gray Davis being replaced with Republican Arnold Schwarzenegger. Before that hadn't happened for almost 100 years. It was North Dakota in 1920, a place that I used to live. I was looking up on some of that had to do with some union dynamics and also some of the Depression era context going on there. So it's very rare. We saw it come somewhat close, or at least closer, with the attempt at recall Scott Walker in Wisconsin. So you'll see this happen. But it's pretty rare in terms of successfully removing someone.
But they do attempt a lot, though. We just don't see it. They try and initiate the process, but they don't. Oftentimes they fail to gather enough signature, thus not ever seen on the ballot.
Yeah, and if you think about the costs incurred, kind of going along that theme. The signature gathering often falls into kind of privately funded, right, versus the state's public coffers, right? But then you also have administrators that have to vet those signatures too. So it's not a completely costless endeavor, whether or not the election is actually held or not. And then on the larger question of if it's worth it, then yeah, we get into those already kind of mentioned. Looking at some of the other kind of areas we could get into here in some of my notes. If you think about the California context, so the recall, I buffed up on some of this history this afternoon here. Feel free to chime in as well if you have questions on it or contributions. So in 1911, California modified its state's constitution to have a recall election along with the ability to do referendums and initiatives, right? So a host of direct democratic progressive era reforms, right? And this was in the wake of what was said to be one of the most corrupt legislative sessions in California in 1907. Southern Pacific Railroad was said to have controlled that legislative session. So oftentimes our politics are reactionary. We see something, we think we don't like this, we want to get special interests out. Californians during that time had that view, and they made these institutional reforms, right? Some of the bigger questions that have been brought up over the 100 years of running that experiment is whether or not that has been an excessive reaction, right? So Gray Davis, he was on a panel shortly after being recalled saying that California has too much democracy, right? So there's I think it was like a Harvard panel considering the question of, does California have too much democracy? And he was arguing yes to that question, right? And if that's something we can consider, and if our answer is yes, then the follow-up question would be, so what would we do about it, right? And if we're answering that question, we want to answer it trying to think beyond our own politics, right? So if you're Gray Davis, of course you're going to think, I don't like this recall, right? But if you're thinking about institutional designs, those are going to exist for hundreds, possibly, hundreds of years. And you want to think about the implications outside of your narrow, short-sighted interests, right? Of whether or not you want someone to stay in office, whether or not you want them removed, because that could fall either way, right? Depending on the political climate and the dynamics going on and voting majorities and whether or not you're aligned with those voting majorities. Thoughts on that? Maybe.
There's a kind of related question from Travis here about the role of big money in a two-party system. Let me quickly answer the first one, the role of money question. Currently, because of the federal Supreme Court case called Citizens v. United, it is really difficult to remove independent expenditure groups, often called super PACs. As long as they don't officially coordinate with official campaigns, they can spend unlimited amount of money. The rationale for this was the First Amendment, right? One's ability to express, even through financial means. So removing big money from politics becomes increasingly difficult. You have to ultimately, one way to get rid of this is to change the Constitution to say, right, say amendment, for example. So there's no up to interpretation kind of things, or the court to actually revisit the Citizens United case to kind of overturn or chisel some, languages in the decision. That would be a very short answer to that. In terms of two-party system, it's one of the so-called the law in political science theory. This French scholar named Maurice Duverger came up with this observation that the electoral system, the way we elect our representatives, determines the party number of parties in the legislative body. The way we do this, single district plurality system or single district majority system, where one person is elected from one small district, and that creates the whole body of, say, House of Representatives. That system most often encourage two-party system. So to answer your question, it's possible, but that means we have to change the way we elect our congressional members. And changing the electoral processes for Senate would be even harder, given that what Senate represents. Just wanted to address that quickly.
Sure, and connecting it back to the recall too. There's a lot of money spent, right? You've seen the product of that with the billboards. You've probably seen the radio ads. I suspect television ads for those still holding on to their cable there. And a lot of that comes from private sources, like political action committees, right? Some are from very known partisan organizations. And where they get the money from depends on what legal vehicle they're using to amass it and spend it, as Vasa outlined there. So that, if you consider that with the idea of the recall was supposed to give more voice to people, who has the funds to collect 1.5 million signatures to recall, right? If you think about, are these individuals that are sort of true believers that are going out on their weekends, collecting signatures right in their counties and doing all the legal paperwork to do this? That's not likely the case, right? It's often partisan groups and private donor sources in the millions that can actually do the administrative efforts, right? To put the boots on the ground, to collect the signatures, as well as to launch multi-million-dollar media campaigns in some of the most expensive media markets in the world, right? So did those amending the California Constitution in 1911 think about this, right? And the drastically different technological landscape, political climate, the different moneyed interests? Probably not, right? And that's the difficulty of designing institutions well. You have to not just look around at what's going on at present, you have to think about what's going to happen in the future, right? So that's why it's good to have the ability to reform even thought of as sacred documents, right? Such as
kind of going back to the idea of democracy, though, Nick. From there, not just about recall, initiative processes. These propositions you may be able to vote every election in California if there are anything on ballot, or this process of referendum where you can undo the act of California legislators and governor. Those systems are signatures are required to, initiate those processes too. And supposedly these are tools and instruments of direct democracy, right? As Nick has stated here. But how democratic are they if in reality it requires so much more financial resources to make it even viable where these things will, be on the ballot, let alone having enough, get out GOTV, get out of the vote kind of activities to make that particular proposition pass. But because of the constitutional interpretation of what is, political freedom and rights to express under Citizens United's case, it's really difficult to remove money even from that process. Even though we have two separate constitutions, California Constitution cannot violate the federal constitution, though there are some examples of that's happening where the federal laws and state laws are not, they're inconsistent. But the idea is you cannot, right? If there's an inconsistency, then the court case can be brought eventually to the US Supreme Court. So I think Travis might have a good point here, asking about the money in politics. That's largely a humongous challenge. Shall we switch it over, Nick, to the national tragic event of January 6th?
Sure.
Unless students have some burning question about recall, you guys can come back and ask us about any questions towards the end.
Yeah, it sounds good to me. If there are no other kind of closing questions, clarification, or larger philosophical ones on California's recall.
Not seeing any for a moment. Maybe students are kind of processing and thinking about something. Yeah, I was surprised when I saw the January 6th event. I thought that wouldn't, I never, I shouldn't say never, but it was rather surprising that it actually happened.
Yeah, surprise. I kind of broke down my thinking on this big topic in terms of some of the causes, context, and implications. But we can also start with kind of our immediate reactions to it. I was surprised as well, at least at how far it went, right? And I was confused. I didn't know how coordinated it was, and that's something we're seeing with the ongoing FBI investigations, because that's going to be important when it comes down to charging these individuals and then also trying to curb this from happening again, is how much was it coordinated? So, because if you're talking about domestic terrorism and the FBI definitions of it and the different legal arguments that will ensue, they need to try to prove coordination, right? That these weren't just individuals that were kind of came for a speech and then devolved into, just a loose affiliation of rioters and things like that. And that's where, from what I've seen, that's what the FBI is initially concluding, right? They found scant evidence of coordination anyway. And a lot of they'll say, I saw one stat that said about 5% of those that were arrested were part of these militias, which were acting in a more coordinated manner, right? So that means about 95%, if we're using that stat there that I saw in a Reuters article quoting one of the FBI investigators here, that they are kind of lone offenders, right? And we have some close to home examples. One of the individuals that died was from San Diego, like a 14-year Air Force vet from San Diego that just said, I'm going to go across the country and I'm going to be here for what they thought was, this historical a day, and kind of to support, right, what they saw as a worthy cause. That's if we give it a very generous reading to individuals like that. She ended up getting shot by Capitol Police, was one of the 5 individuals that died that day, including an officer that was struck in the head with a fire extinguisher, as we know. So it's very messy, and there's a reason why we're still seeing this investigation going on. And unfortunately, the investigation is following along partisan lines as well. So you have the House narrowly had the vote to create a commission to investigate it. And there's only 2 Republicans on it. I have Representative Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger. Those are the only 2 Republicans on the panel, and the Republicans, and Kevin McCarthy as the House Minority Leader says that Republicans are going to make their own commission, right? But that's yet to be seen. So if you have roughly about half of the chamber not wanting to investigate it, or not as to the extent that the other side does, that's going to make it even messier, right? But regardless of if the House and the Senate investigate formally, there's charges being brought, right? So the number that I saw, again, let me know if you have fresher data, but there's been 570 arrested and 470 people have been charged from across 40 states. So that makes the argument of coordination even kind of more difficult, right? You can point to people that have large audiences. So think about some right-wing media personalities like Alex Jones, or some kind of loose affiliations and things like that. But it's very difficult by way of our Constitution, thinking about freedom of speech and freedom of press, to connect it to that, right? And it would have to be more direct and more compelling, I imagine, than saying, well, this person listened to that newscast, or and then they went to this event, and then this happened. It would have to be more compelling than that to bring someone up on federal charges of domestic terrorism, right? So we'll be seeing that play out.
I'm curious, what was their purpose? To what end did they decide to? Is it to show that they can do this, or is it? I'm still kind of puzzled. Like, what was it? What was the driving? What was the rationale? Especially those who are traveling far to join, well, perhaps join the event that preceded that tragedy and act of violence, but then you decide to go into a building that and also the question is, why aren't some people don't want to have a more thorough investigation, even to investigate the security apparatus of U.S. Capitol, where many events happen, including state of the state address, where almost everybody, is in that chamber one day out of the, a year. So I'm not sure why they're not investigating. without raising any, conspiratory claims, I'm really curious as to like, what is the rationale for not wanting to have investigation?
Mhm.
What is the reason why some of these folks have, participated in a violent portion of the whole set of events? It's really interesting and surprising how it turned out to be.
Yeah.
It's interesting as we're watching the backstories unfold in various ways from the Capitol law enforcement who thereafter committed suicide. I think there's been 4 from the Capitol Police and 1 from the Metropolitan Police. And I don't want to, feed into conspiracies either, but it's so interesting to try to understand if the reasonings were, the same. Was there some kind of pact? Was there some kind of thing going on in the background that because there was discussion that I guess there's proof that there were some folks in the Capitol that had done given permission by Capitol Police to give like a tour of the Capitol, which was, later believed to be, they were just showing them how to get around the Capitol in and out and so on and so forth, so that it would be more successful. But for those that have been sentenced thus far, and for the one guy in particular, I think they called him a showman, that was in the garb that he was wearing, that he's had to stay in jail during this time while they're arraigning him and deciding what to do with them. And even when he gets sentenced, there has been no leniency, which for those that maybe watch the folks testify, that was the most gut-wrenching testimony I heard from the Capitol Police officers that were there when they were testifying before the committee, for the special committee on January 6th. And their testimony, I taped it. I couldn't stop watching it because it was so informative, but also from the lens, from their unique perspectives. It told different stories, so we're still learning, that much more, but those things are gut-wrenching. So as Masi, you were saying, try to understand the whys, and then while we're doing that, understand what happened to the people who tried to protect the Capitol and the people at the Capitol, their stories. That just makes it even more so, dumbfounding, if you will. Like,
this might be a rather controversial question, but this is just a question I have. I have really never thought about this, but supposedly there are, 530 plus folks, if the members are present or in the Capitol building. And these representatives are people, but they are also institution in the sense that they collectively make U.S. Congress. In whether you agree, or not, at least on a paper, they are one of the most sacred institutions of the United States government, where they are the, one of the 3 branches, right, of the government. It has constitutional standing, right? It is a first article of the Constitution, and I think the framer kind of purposely did that to talk about legislative body, and that's where that building kind of represents. And these folks are coming in without invitation through violent means, but I'm surprised there were more violence in an effort to protect the building from the law enforcement side. What were they, looking at what's happening out there on the street and the use of, means of violence from the law enforcement side? And if anywhere, I thought this is one of those places where use of those, violent means to protect the institution would have happened, as in it could have resulted in a lot more people getting injured in an effort to protect the entity, but that didn't happen. So I'm kind of puzzled as to, was there a reason why? I think those people who did end up getting, shot got way too close to the members, I think, from what I've read and what I've seen. That's what, right? But still, just being in the building itself could have warranted, hey, this is assault on, I'm just curious to if anybody have thought about this.
Well, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So this is my wheelhouse, and I work with internet security and a lot of the law enforcement folks. And I was on a Zoom meeting the other day with Lieutenant Colonel Vidman, and a lot of what all of you just brought up was discussed. And one of the things that's hard for us to fathom on the outside is that there's many protocols. So you just can't bring in the military in 15 minutes. Capitol Police has to say, we need help, we're in trouble. So it has to go through a certain protocol. And where the investigations have come up is that the results are that those protocols were blocked, they were stopped. And that was the administration that was doing that. And so now that's what's coming out is that, well, when they asked, even Pence asked for help and it got stopped. So people did ask for help and they did try to get more assistance over there, but some of the assistance took 3 and 4 hours when it should have taken 10 minutes. And so that's part of the problem. And then to someone's question asking, why do people not want to move forward with the investigation? Well, a lot of them were either complicit or they were active, they were actors in that, situation that took place. And they don't want their records subpoena, which is happening right now. And a lot of them, unfortunately, are older folks that have not taken the time to understand how technology works and how GPS works. And they don't understand that everything they do is tracked. And so now they're finding out, oh, you mean my phone records are going to be subpoenaed and this is going to be subpoenaed, and even photos, have metadata on the back end that says where and when that was actually taken, exact photo. So these people are scared to death about an investigation because they don't understand technology. It's very scary to them. And I think we're going to see some shocking stuff that comes out from those subpoenas that were issued. So there was a lot of chatter, unbelievable amount of chatter. I even saw it in some of the stuff that I was on, and I'm not even in some high level protected type of groups where the feds are at, where they can see this stuff. There was all kinds of chatter, and there were all types of warnings that were coming out, just like you're seeing now for this Saturday, right? We've heard about this Saturday. Yes. They're putting up the fence, and this is nothing new. Okay, this exact same thing happened January 6th, but there weren't the proper protocols put in place because that's what the current administration wanted to happen, exactly what happened. And then someone else had asked why, what was the meaning behind this? Like what was their end goal? It was to overthrow the government. They were very clear in that matter. And then someone else asked, what about these people that are being prosecuted? Sad to say that the majority of those that have been prosecuted right now and going to jail, sometimes up to 2 and 3 years, have cognitive issues. They literally are people that we should have empathy and compassion for because they do struggle with cognitive issues or drug abuse or different things that are needing help. And unfortunately, that is who's being preyed upon right now. They're being pulled in to believe this. And a lot of these people that were pulled into this that come up to the January 6th insurrection, they are loners. They're people that sit in their room. They're lonely, especially after, the pandemic. And they actually had a chance to be part of something and a movement. And then the words like brothers were used, and people that normally didn't belong into society, who were outcasts or didn't have any close connections to family and friends, instantly were brought into this group. And that's their demographic. I mean, their demographic is easy. And this isn't going away. It's going to get worse and worse and worse, unfortunately. Sorry for that long explanation, but I'm in these meetings like weekly, and this is what's coming out, and I think it's shocking.
That's great. Thanks for that contribution, Tammy. Like some of the questions brought up here too, in terms of accountability and having empathy for the various individuals and their muddled motives or different, mental states, right? And that larger context kind of gets at a question of what does justice look like here? Who should be held accountable? There's also brought up in the chat here too about freedom of speech, but not all freedom of speech is protected. That's very true, right? So what does accountability look like here on the individual level, but also in the larger political environment? That means the pundits, that means the members of Congress, as well as the former president, and how much you can hold them accountable for their words and their mobilizing of people, right? As is noted by Tammy here, people that were not in the best, many of them not in the best frame of mind, right? So all big and good questions we're going to have to answer as a collective eventually, or at least our institutions will.
Yeah, but there wouldn't be more violence if they are needing more support from the armed forces. If that was, that I'm like still kind of stuck on that. If more supports are needed because protocols weren't followed and took forever for the armed forces or the National Guards to step in with bigger guns, so to speak, or more people, and Capitol Police were desperately trying to hold the ground. Yet, right? I'm just kind of thinking through like the role of, the question about security apparatus. If any group of people can get in, supposedly one of the more secured building isn't quite secure. So that in itself is kind of challenging there.
So
Because
Masa,
I think what they really struggled with is, do we bring in more, armed people to take that down, or will that make it escalate even further? So that's another thing that you have to think about also is, does it then get even worse because you're showing force from the outside? And the biggest part of the problem is we are only one of 195 countries in the world. I know Americans take up so much oxygen in the room that we tend to think we are the only country in the whole world. But what this actually did was show all of those nation state actors, those bad actors that are against us, like Iran and Russia and China and North Korea. It showed how vulnerable we were. And it showed how all the weak spots, and that's what we have to be really scared about. Not just our homegrown terrorists, but just how it showed how weak we were in our protocols.
And how fragmented society might be. That political event was rather, indicative of what's happening in society at large, I think. Sorry, Nick, you were about to say something.
If you ever read The Art of War, this is exactly what has taken place. It's divide and conquering. And that is what those bad nation state actors have done by all of the trolling and disinformation and misinformation that's gone on the last 5 years, is it's divided our country, which makes us weaker to attack.
Yeah, and Art of War also says, don't pick a fight unless you know for sure you're gonna win too. Yeah.
What comes to my mind is, term gaslighting took on a whole brand new meaning with the president, because if you recall that day, he was just supposed to meet with his constituencies. Something really great is going to happen. There was, it's always grand and great, but not really until they got there that he said, we're going to go up to the Capitol. And he through back channels, and I mean by Fox and Friends and all the right-wing folks was able to garner enough support from people or organizations like the Proud Boys and the other militias that we were talking about earlier to come. He summoned them. He said, come on. He said, let's go to the Capitol. It's like he poked his chest out and put everybody out there and then ran away. But he was the gaslighting that he was doing. I think that mixed messaging with police and law enforcement, I don't think that they really anticipated what was really going to happen, that insurrection that happened. When they started, that's why they didn't have those, the fences up like they're putting up again now for Saturday's event to defend the January 6th insurrectionists. That's going to be a very interesting, I can't even fathom what that really means. But if it's more of the same, then at least this time we're prepared and we have all that fencing up and not just these little guards that could obviously be pushed through and used as battering things to use on the law enforcement while they were there. They just became weapons of opportunity. Not funny, but.
Put so much out there, I almost don't know where to go next on this. Masa, I just had a quick clarification question. When you were saying you were surprised that there wasn't as much reaction, did you kind of mean on the more officer by officer individual level?
Yeah,
Fire?
yeah, because a lot of the unfortunate cases where a non-civilian gets seriously harmed or killed on regular day-to-day setting on the streets of San Diego or streets of New York, where officer engaged, with an individual group of individuals, they often, rationalize the use of deadly force was necessary because I felt scared.
Mm-hmm.
That seems to be the kind of, at least, maybe I'm only hearing and seeing because, only things I hear is what they presented. Maybe not, that's not the norm, but I see the pattern. Social scientists like us, Nick, we like to see a pattern, and we see a pattern, we want an explanation. But in this case, it looked like it was pretty violent in there from what we were able to see from what's, were available to us. And I'm pretty sure some of the officers might have been scared, but only a few discharged their weapons. I mean, that's perhaps Capitol Police, because who are in the building, because of potential consequences if they miss a target, so to speak. Maybe they are trained differently. That's perhaps potential reasons here. But there are over 500 folks in there, plus their staffers, plus, right? So I just try to understand, the rationale.
I may be able to answer that a little bit. The majority of the Capitol Police do not have weapons. They have tasers, but they do not have guns. They're not trained to kill. They're not trained to maim. They're not trained to disarm, to disable. They've just never been up against anything like this. And some of the guys that were Capitol Police that were former military even said that they had never had experienced anything like that in their hand-to-hand combat days. So this just came totally out of left field. It weren't perfectly planned as Trump wanted it to be planned. He called everybody there, got them riled up, summoned them, and then it was the perfect storm. He knows they're not armed and they only have tasers, right? So it's just a different mindset. Capitol Police aren't, I've dated all types of law enforcement, sheriffs, you name it, and they are trained to really defend. They have covered with stuff all over their body to defend, and they walk around with bulletproof vests each day. Even in San Diego, they have bulletproof vests. These guys don't walk around with bulletproof vests. They may now, but they didn't before January 6th. It was a completely different mindset.
Wow.
So to answer your question, Nick, where do we go from here? Perhaps, rethink about, I always said to my students, think about, yeah, congressional members, presidents, they are people. But once they take the oath, right, of office, they kind of become part of the office. And at least that's how I interpret the, institution, the relationship between actors and institutions. If that's the case, and if building that houses those people also symbolizes the Constitution, right, a part of the Constitution, the Article 1, if you interpret this event through that lens, it was a serious assault on the US Constitution. Whether you like the Constitution or not, that's a different story. I'm not saying, I have a different idea about what the US Constitution represents, but if that's a document with which everything else that political are kind of dictated by it, we can amend them. It's hard to do, but so you might want to see, violent act, and if you see from different lens, it could mean different for different person. In the kind of, maybe I'm not making a whole lot of sense here, but the symbolic value of the building and the people who are in it could change the way we see this event, is what I was trying to say. I don't know if that makes sense at all.
Well, January 6th was an inside job. That's exactly what that would be called in the fall. It was an inside job, and hopefully that's not gonna happen, right? But I think one thing it did show is how complacent even the members of Congress were. There were laptops and phones that were taken, and guess what? They didn't even have passwords on there. A 10-year-old with an iPhone has a password on their phone. How does a member of Congress not have a password on their phone or on their computer? So I think it just showed the level of complacency everybody had in that building. It was shocking, actually.
Lori's asking the question, what would have happened had they been successful? Any thoughts, Nick? If they were, so this is a counterfactual argument or discussion. What if they did take over the building?
I think that gets on the question too of whether or not on motives too. Like, of course, there was it would have to be a delusion to think you're going to take over the government because it's bigger than that building, right?
Yeah.
It's the largest military ever. No private citizen can match it, right? So that's, I don't know how I'd put this in a less possibly inciting way, but like, I don't want this to be misread, but if they took over the building, it would be very temporary. You wouldn't just now be, it's not like Trump would maintain an office, right? You need coordination. And this is where it would be, I think the use of the word of a coup would be appropriate is if you had, say, members of the military or play out the hypothetical of the sitting president at the time saying, yep, I'm staying here now. Our side won, right? I can't even envision it. Even if they did that, it's just all the collective action problems of having the rest of the institutions just like, all right, I guess you got the building now, so we have a different form of government all of a sudden. Like that doesn't make sense.
Yeah,
I think that's what the defense teams for some of these people that showed up, some of the rioters, I think they're going to be saying that to be like, we didn't have these motives too. We didn't think we were changing our government, taking it over, right? Maybe some did. Again, that's why it's so difficult to talk about, and that's why I'm hesitant to say, these are the motives, right? It wasn't, or this is what would have happened, right? It's all speculative, but we can take our knowledge of institutions and general principles of collective action and all the rest, and and go from there.
Yeah, our military is not just biggest. It's bigger than the next 10 countries put together in terms of its spending. It's huge. It's the largest employer, I think, of this country, and it is the biggest division in our government. Kind of thinking about, but Nick, I have come across folks that I had a pleasure, having a conversation with. They genuinely do believe there's enough people in the United States who would, have gone along with this coup d'etat kind of process. But I'm with you. Like, I don't see how possible that is. But
yeah, I think there's a distinction too between folks that might agree with that, right? Let's take over the government. This act has its share of, I guess you can call it fanfare, but I think it's mostly just implicit support. It's one thing to say, I wish they would have been successful and Trump would have remained office or done a recount or what their end was. And there's a difference between that kind of passive support and then saying, yeah, let's do another civil war, right? I'm going to pick up, I'm going to marshal my resources to, have a revolution, right? And I guess a lot of my hesitancy here too is to fan these flames that we've seen the news outlets already doing, right? Leading up to this, there's all this talk about, what's going to happen with the election outcomes and a lot of civil war. And as academics, we're usually the ones saying, well, we have formal definitions for these things that are not the popular definitions. They're often not the ones that pundits are throwing around, right? For coups, we don't define it the same as, newscasters, right? For revolution, we don't define it the same. And that's because we're, again, trying to be objective in classifying things. We're not trying to be alarmist, right? So the media and pundits, politicians included, they have incentive to be alarmist, right? And to call it these things that will get your attention of your voters if you're a member of Congress, and attention of your audience if you are a cable newscaster, right? So that's where I guess it's just kind of some context for why.
Yeah, I agree, especially, as Nick, I studied political violence as a part of schooling, and in particular civil wars. And what I have found out from my studies, people are violent averse. Even the most challenging countries whose economic and political and social systems are pretty much have failed. Still people are very risk averse or risk neutral at best. Not too many people risk acceptant, as in, picking up guns and showing up at Capitol to take over. And collective action, there's always way to, free ride, right? Enjoy the outcome without paying a personal cost. And that's true in many areas of political behavior. Anything from, this morning I was driving to work, listening to KPBS. They are doing, donation, fundraising, and how many folks who are listeners actually enjoy it without paying. We're talking about, $5-10 a donation they're asking for radio programs that you might be listening to every day. I just don't see people, picking up in marshaling resources, as Nick said, to something that is probabilistically rather almost impossible. So maybe there are some, personal health challenges that some of these folks are suffering from. Maybe.
Well, it's cognitive issues, but then it's also the fact that they've led a life of not being recognized or felt that they belong. So there's it's a certain demographic that they pull in, and it's those that felt like they didn't have a voice before. I used to live in the South. It's a lot of white supremacists that feel like we are diluting the whites of the United States and becoming a population that is non-white, and that scares them. That's just the way they were brought up. Some of the stuff that I saw in the South, even in 2000, was still shocking that people thought that way. And if you think about it, for just a couple hour event, for the feds to have already gotten 500 cases, and just realizing that in criminal, it's beyond a reasonable doubt is the burden of proof. It's not like, regular circuit court or superior court where it's beyond a shadow of a doubt, or preponderance of evidence. I'm sorry. So they have a higher threshold to prove their case, and I haven't heard one case that has been dismissed. So they know they're going to win the cases they're being brought up. And if you think about those 500 people, and those people each know 50 people that think like them, exponentially, it becomes very frightening that there are that many people out there that think like this. And they are risk adverse because they already feel like they have nothing to
lose.
Can I be a political science professor for a tiny bit to put some thoughts, political theoretical thoughts there? In the subfield of comparative politics, where the purpose is to compare different systems, we often start from this idea of what is a modern state. State doesn't not mean in California, but the state, nation state, state. German sociologist named Max Weber talked about the characteristics of a functioning state. He defined state as it's a political entity, right? It's a political entity that's attached to a particular territory, but the entity must enjoy it has to monopolize the legitimate use of violence. That defines what the functioning state is. So if we go into civil war the way we did back in the 1800s, by definition, I think we are saying that we are having so-called failed state or failing state, or at the best weak state, the way we define what functioning state or not functioning state is. Even though we have a lot of dysfunction and the challenges in this country and different areas, from racial tension to issues involve the identity issues, anything from gender, sexual orientations, one's ability, physical ability, and so on, financial challenges. I don't think we are meeting this definition, the political science definition of what failed state or weak state is. It's still right to somewhat through that definition, it's functioning. So kind of going with what Nick was saying, like how journalists and pundits use the language and how political scientists use language, sometimes it's like making my life really hard, because I have to kind of undo these things in classrooms. But that's a long way to say, if you're interested in any of this, you should be taking Professor Boucher's classes, and there are a bunch of variety of classes we're offering. Just wanted to do a shameless promotion of our courses in our school.
Great, I'll take it. So running up against time here. Anything else, or how do we want to conclude?
I'm more, since, sorry, I'm doing something I tell my student not to do, in conclusion, bringing up new ideas. But I'm more concerned about voter suppression. These events are very important, but this trend we are seeing nationally in some areas of voter suppression, that could be a topic that we should perhaps think about next time we do this type of engagement. It concerns me greatly. Voting is a characteristics that defines a democratic form of government, but the way we are, arranging how things are done in this country, it is a big part. Given a history of, voter suppression, from its founding till now, it still continues. And in many way, non-political science way, but in many way, folks kind of equate one's, citizenship to one's ability to vote, right? So it's important things, and there are a lot of institutional things that many states are doing to kind of undo what has been like a baby step of progress, and that concerns me a lot.
Yeah, I think that also that gaslighting that, that we heard throughout the entire 2020 election, constantly, there's all these irregularities and it's a setup, that our voting institutions aren't secure. And that was still going on when in some of the television commercials that you may have seen, or any of the things that came out from Larry Elder, for example, and he was talking about, we have to question because the system is rigged, and that's all I hear. And the more that's been gaslighted so many times, there's so many people that I have conversations with topically that believe the system is rigged.
But they want to use the rigged system to be elected. That doesn't follow logic. I'm sorry, like.
Correct, but some of the voters out there, like the disenfranchisement, is that why should I vote? I hear college, folks saying, why should I vote? And the election has already been decided by a rigged system. That doesn't make sense to me either, knowing what I know about our elections that are safe, secure. We don't do that, but yet that has been, oh my gosh, it's been jammed down our throats as though it were true. And some people have come to believe it, while the others, like Masa, you're like, this is not logical. That's not even, it is no logic to it.
Well, let's warrant them their claim that the system is rigged. My question is, how do you undo it? That's one. That'll be a right. Just don't say it's wrong. Then how do you correct it? I think that would be a better way of thinking this. And there are other ways that it will be very difficult to rig. Some scholars have, at least in idea, entertained this process called sortition. Not election, but sortition, where you randomly assign somebody to serve in Congress. I know these are the ideas that's floating around. Sortition is the random selection is the most equitable way of doing it, maybe, but I see a problem with that. Sortition could be very difficult. Somebody has to program the sortition program, and that will be biased and rigged. So what is a rig-proof system?
The effort it takes to try to get someone to understand that it's not rigged and go vote, that same amount of effort could be spent on getting 10 people that don't have access to a voting facility and getting them to attain access and get them there. So I think we just have to pay attention to where we put our effort. You can't change the mindset as much as you can then, as easily as you can help someone that already wants to do the right thing be able to do the right thing, if that makes sense. There's a lot of people that don't vote because they don't have access. They don't have childcare, they don't have they don't have a drive there, they don't have time off of work, that type of thing. But you will have those people that will buy a house, $5 million house online, via DocuSign, but they can't send in a ballot. And you're always going to have those people arguing that. It's a talking point and they're just repeating it.
Yeah, but on the access front, California, I think, is doing a pretty good job making this permanent, absentee ballot. It worked out during the pandemic season.
Sure did.
Right, because we don't have to have any reason in California to have mail ballot made permanent. Some states actually require medical and other documentation to get that. So California is doing pretty well, and we about 12% of the population of the state. large enough, almost 40 million, right?
Only one state, and we were talking about federal issues. So in
Yeah.
rural of the United States, where it's 3 hours to drive to the nearest big town, and there are those places, that's where I think time needs to be spent helping others.
Yeah. Again, that is a, de facto voter suppression, right? Making it unreasonable and excess. The cost of voting outweighs the potential benefit the voters can get. The benefit in the form of, preferred policy or preferred candidate being elected. Another collective action issues there. Yeah, there are a lot of these inconsistencies that Travis put on here too. Very interesting. I would say encourage your friends, family members to pop in. City College, everybody's welcome here. Let's have these conversation in our classes. That's what I have to say about all this. It starts, perhaps, political science can kind of bring in the civic education aspect of political science, which was the original intent of, political science per se. If you look at the history of the discipline. So perhaps, we can do a healthy mix of civic education and also, discipline as a academic, research discipline that has serious implications on what we do politically. Any thoughts, Nick?
Concluding thoughts, everything you said is dead on. Contributions beyond that. I'm just looking at the chat here. There's a lot of things I could say, but I'm trying to be kind of concluding here. I think there's going to be always a subsection, hopefully a smaller one, that just doesn't believe in the institutions at all, right? They're not, and I think is brought up, they said it's only rigged when it's going wrong for them, right? There's always going to be a subsection like that within the population. So I think Tammy's point on empower those that believe in enough in the system to participate, empower those, I think there's something looking like a solution there. Also, in terms of from institutions, they have to think about chipping away at some of that cynicism, right? And that can be making institutions look more like them, right? So it's representative democracy, make it look more like them in every way imaginable, and make them more transparent, right? So I think I sound like kind of a strict institutionalist there in terms of how do we design them, right? And how do we change the culture in terms of being less divisive and not having folks just recall back to the California, not just trying to collect petitions every time the person didn't win, right? Because then we're constantly caught up in that apparatus, right? Yeah, get registered, participate in electoral politics, and empower those to do that as well, and participate in non-electoral politics as well, right? Other activist avenues.
And it's not too late to register for political science class, American politics in particular. Professor Boucher here is teaching late start 8-week American politics class, which covers California as well. If you're interested, please, look at the catalog and schedule, invite your friend. It's done asynchronously. So somewhat self-paced with all the contents that Nick has, and he mixes things that are fun, things that are artsy, music, poetry, other literature that's not political science, but has political messages and implications. So highly encourage you to register yourself or have your friends, family members, bring the whole family in if you like. to have some more lively discussion, though it's going to be virtual.
I want to thank everybody for coming today, and thank you for even extending the time. I appreciate the expertise of both Nick and Masa. Appreciate what you do for our students at San Diego City College. And I want to thank the students that came. Travis Dart, Travis Hayden, Tammy, Alyssa, Elizabeth, thank you all for coming. It's been a really enlightening conversation. And I hope that we can, keep it moving and do another one soon. So you just let me know when and we'll get it going.
Cool.
For those of you that viewed today's conversation, thank you for joining us. I'm Lori Oldham from the Office of Student Affairs, and we say good night. Enjoy the rest of your